The reason why Africans went in was because of a preemptive strike. And because of this, and because we lack an understanding, we have to go back to the Punic Wars, of which there were 3, that happened before the Common Era. Basically, give or take 300, maybe 200. This is the time of Hannibal Barca, who went to war with the Romans. Hannibal Barca, B-A-R-C-A. This is the Hannibal that we see that's going up into the Alps with elephants and defeating the Romans. There are things that we need to understand about the history of this area. Out of Tunis, this is where Carthage, or what we call Carthage, was.
It seems to result from the most careful investigation that the principal commerce of the interior of Africa has always been carried on in 2 directions. That which has been described from Ethiopia through the valley of the Nile, and that of the Sudan from the Niger to the Mediterranean coast. The western end of the road, starting from Carthage, ran in a southeasterly direction through the Fezzan to the site of the present Mosul. After making the junction at that point with the Egyptian road, it turned southwards to the Niger and was the road which has been so often mentioned as the Tripoli-Fezzan road of the present day. Along this road, the Carthaginians traded with the Niger for carbuncles, skins, gold, ivory, and other goods. Thus, we get on unquestionable authority evidence of a well-established connection in very early times between Ethiopia and Egypt by the valley of the Nile, between Egypt and Carthage by a road crossing the desert through Siwa and Augala, and between Carthage and the Niger by the present Tripoli-Fezzan route. If we take Mosul and Thebes as lying almost on the same parallels of latitude outside the Tropic of Cancer, and Gao and Meroe as having also almost parallel positions on the edge of the summer rains, some 8 degrees farther south, we get the 4 corners of an irregular parallelogram, of which 3 sides were in permanent communication with each other.
These were the cousins to the Phoenicians who were in present-day Lebanon, and these were the traders, and these were the merchants. Phoenicia basically comes from the word purple. And as Dr. Ivan van Sertima tells us, purple was the color of royalty. Purple was a color that was looked upon as a very important color. Purple was with the Greek Empire. Purple was with the Senate in the Roman Empire. Purple was a color that was traded for generations and generations because it had an important esoteric value. Purple is the last color as it relates to the rainbow. You go from infrared to ultraviolet. So these Phoenicians, these traders in the color purple, dealt with their cousins who also were traders from Carthage. And this is why they were wealthy Africans in Tunis.
The civilization of the Phoenicians, contemporary at least in part with the history of Egypt, dates also from the earliest periods of which civil history has any record. The Phoenicians are believed to have migrated from Eritrea on the coast of the Red Sea about the year 2000 BC to the Mediterranean, where they were first established on a strip of Syria between the chain of Lebanon and the sea, and afterwards took possession of a portion of Greece, of some of the islands of the Mediterranean, and of the principal promontories along the coast of Africa to the Straits of Gibraltar, and as far down the western coast as the mouths of the Senegal. They also colonized Spain and spread up the coast of Western Europe, navigating as far as the Baltic and the English Channel. Carthage, of later growth, is believed to have been founded about 853 BC. Other Phoenician cities on the coast of Africa were of far greater antiquity than Carthage, and Phoenician trade in the Gulf of Salé on the west coast of Morocco was famous for many centuries before the Romans gave to that part of the coast the name of Sinus Emporicus, or Merchants' Bay. Phoenicia, like Syria, was never one state, but from the earliest period down to the Persian monarchy was always divided into a number of separate cities, each with its little territory around it. Allied cities in Phoenicia were very numerous, and it is thought probable that there may have been periods when all the cities of Phoenicia formed one confederation, at the head of which at one time stood Sidon, and at a later period, Tyre. Throughout the colonies of Phoenicia, as well as in the mother country, a common religion formed likewise a bond of union for the cities and strengthened and preserved the connection between them. The chief authority was placed in the hands of kings, who in turn were to some extent controlled by high priests. The revenues of the cities depended in large measure on their trade, and the Phoenicians have lived in history as a commercial people. Through a considerable portion of their history, the Phoenicians appear to have acted as commercial agents for Egypt. As they sailed, it is related that they landed on the coasts, sowing the land and waiting for harvests. Thus, a tradition of them lingers on the west coast as well as on the east, and to them it is in some quarters believed that the legend of the first white men in western Negro land may be traced. Carthage had intercourse across the desert with Negro land, and drew thence its supply of elephants, as well as gold and carbuncles. We may perhaps therefore carry back the date to a period when the Phoenicians dominated Egyptian politics, and the worship of Astarte or Venus Erycina was common in the valley of the Nile. It is interesting also to observe in Egyptian records the constant reference to magicians of the south. The part which magic played in the chronicles of Egypt is of course a matter of common knowledge. The whole north coast of Africa was, we are told, protected by talismans, burning glasses, and other marvels raised on pedestals which were placed at intervals along the shore. Alexandria could not be built till talismans had been erected which had power to protect it from the monsters of the deep.
So that to understand who the Moors were, you have to step back. You have to go beyond 710, 711 AD. Who were these people that went into Spain? And you would have to understand that the Moors, they were the Etruscans. The Etruscans were Africans that had built the city known as Etruria. Etruria is the country we today call Italy. The Etruscans were on the islands of Sardinia, on the island of Corsica. They were developing civilizations in the Mediterranean basin. There were Africans that were in Spain 1,000 years before the Common Era. We have to see that the language of the Etruscans comes directly out of the Niger-Congo language, which goes from West Africa through Central Africa to Southern Africa. It is the base upon which Kiswahili is based. It is the language upon which most Africans are now in dialogue to. The largest group of Niger-Congo speakers are the Bantu people. I don't care for the word Bantu, but the basic thing is that these are the well-melanated Africans that show evidence of the civilization of linguistical culture comes out of the Niger-Congo language, and this was the language spoken in the Mediterranean basin. When you go over to Turkey, this was an African place. When you go to Greece, it was African. When you go over into Italy, it was African. And guess what? The capital of the country, Etruria, was called Rume, R-U-M-A. We're talking linguistics now. That is why the capital of Italy today is called what? Rome. It came directly out of this. All of the Roman baths, all of the Roman civilizations, the architecture of Rome came from the Etruscans. These were the individuals that had settled in this area thousands of years ago when there were no other cultural groups in this area. There were no Greeks, there were no Romans. This is what most modern day cultural anthropologists don't want to talk about, because you'd have to give credit to the people who developed these civilizations.